So Halloween is coming up, a full month of spooky skeletons, people running around in costumes, and young kids using their full brain power to maximize their run for candy. All good stuff. But then there's people like me who don't care. I personally have nothing against Halloween. In fact, I used to enjoy it more than I do now. We had this sort of Halloween party that took place in a church. You had the usual food bar, the party rooms where you played games, and the usual haunted house room that I never did. I was a chicken at the time. However, there was this one part of the Halloween party that I always enjoyed. The trunk or treat. It's basically the same as trick-or-treating, except it takes place in a parking lot instead of a whole neighborhood. Instead of people handing out candy on their front doorstep, they're handing it out in the back of their car, which is usually decorated. After being the trunk-or-treater for a while, I eventually got promoted to the trunk-or-treatee that hangs out in the back of the car and hands out candy. I considered myself lucky because we had a van while doing this, so I got a lot of space in the back to relax in. No offense to anyone out there, but if I was in any other car that isn't a van or a pickup, yeah. I only had one problem with Halloween. When the time came around to Halloween night, and it was time to go out and trick-or-treat, 50% of the time it was raining. Sometimes it finished raining earlier in the day, but most of the time it's either raining or wet from the rain. But then it doesn't matter because then you have to spend half the time making sure you aren't going to get your costume wet and ruined. So yeah, I stopped going because of that. Instead I got to hang out at home and hand out candy. But whether or not I go trick-or-treating is irrelevant here, so let's move on to the last thing. Corn mazes. It's pretty self-explanatory. Me and a bunch of friends went to a corn maze on a cornfield a friend of one of the parents owned. We were handed maps of the maze and a ticket per person. And set up around the maze were some stamps where we stamped the ticket. Unlike a usual maze, instead of going from point A to point B, we were supposed to make our way around the maze collecting stamps and then get back out of the maze. Of course, I never got all the stamps because when we did this, it was usually around sunset. And once it got dark enough to require flashlights, they sent in a few people with chainless chainsaws and masks to run around and scare people. I always chickened out at that point. The overall activity was fun though. So ending on a high note, thanks for watching and see you next time. Oh, and subscribe, that too.